They thought it would be funny to set up the janitor on a fake blind date, just a cruel office prank. But what happened next left the entire restaurant in tears. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel this story, the humility, the pain, and the unexpected grace. And when it's over, tell me in the comments, what did your heart feel? It all started in the glass towers of Apex Innovations, one of the city's biggest and most prestigious tech companies, where success was measured by the size of one's office and the brand of one's suit. The building gleamed every morning, its glass walls reflecting ambition, but beneath that shine worked people whose names no one bothered to remember. Among them was a man who had quietly become part of the building's rhythm, Thomas, the janitor. Every morning before sunrise, he arrived, pushing his mop across marble floors that echoed with the footsteps of people who never looked down long enough to see him. His uniform was old and faded, the company logo almost rubbed off from years of washing. But no matter how long his shift or how tired his body, Thomas always wore a gentle smile. It wasn't forced. It was a reflection of a heart that had learned to find peace in small moments. A sunrise through glass, the smell of fresh coffee, or a simple thank you that sometimes slipped from kind soul. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. Many assumed he had nothing to say, but the truth was he simply didn't want to interrupt a world too busy to listen. Behind that calm face was a story, one that carried years of struggle, sacrifice, and silent strength. Thomas had once dreamed big. He wasn't born to clean floors. Life had simply steered him there through storms he never asked for. But no one knew that. To them, he was just the janitor. One afternoon, as the sunlight poured into the company break room, a group of young employees gathered around a table, laughing over their coffee cups. They were bright, energetic, and careless, too caught up in their own worlds to realize when their jokes went too far. Among them was Jake, a fresh intern barely out of college. He was smart, ambitious, but had a sharp tongue and a mischievous streak that often crossed lines. While they were chatting about their weekend plans and dating apps, Jake noticed Thomas quietly wiping down the coffee counter nearby. With a half smirk, he whispered, "Hey, what if we set up the janitor on a blind date?" The others looked at him, surprised, then burst into laughter. "A blind date? With who?" one asked between giggles. Jake shrugged. "I don't know, maybe someone way out of his league. Let's see how he handles it." The group roared with laughter. Some felt a bit uneasy, but said nothing. Peer pressure has a way of silencing conscience. Within minutes, the idea turned into a full-blown prank. They decided to make it more dramatic, more fun. One of them suggested using the name of Evelyn Carter, the company's CEO, a woman everyone admired but few had ever spoken to directly. She was intelligent, elegant, and carried an aura of power that intimidated even senior executives. Imagine the look on his face when he thinks he's having dinner with her. Jake laughed, nearly spilling his coffee. They created a fake dating profile using a photo of Evelyn they found online from a company event. They filled it with charming messages, pretending to be a kind and mysterious woman interested in meeting a humble, hard-working man. Then, using a fake account, they messaged Thomas during his lunch break. At first, Thomas thought it was a mistake. Someone must have messaged the wrong person, he thought. But the messages were kind, polite, respectful, and full of warmth. They spoke to him as if he mattered. For a man who had spent years being invisible, that small spark of attention meant something. When the person on the other side suggested a dinner at La Maison, one of the city's most elegant restaurants, Thomas hesitated. "I'm not sure I belong in a place like that," he replied. But the messages encouraged him, saying they admired humble men like him. By the end of the week, he finally agreed. He didn't know what to wear, but he decided he'd try his best. He ironed his cleanest shirt, polished his shoes, and even bought a small bouquet of flowers with the little money he had left. Meanwhile, Jake and his friends were already making plans for their big night. They booked a table at the same restaurant, pretending they were just there for dinner, ready to record every moment from a distance. They could barely contain their laughter as they imagined the scene. A janitor nervously waiting in a luxury restaurant, thinking he was about to dine with the CEO. To them, it was just harmless fun, a joke to make their weekend more entertaining. But what they didn't realize was that this joke would reveal more about their own humanity than Thomas's. As the day drew closer, Thomas couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of excitement. Not because he was going on a date, but because someone seemed to see him for who he truly was. He didn't know that he was walking straight into a trap, one that would soon change everyone's life inside Apex Innovations forever. Friday evening arrived with a kind of nervous excitement that Thomas hadn't felt in years. The city glowed beneath the night sky. Headlights streaked down wet roads. Soft jazz spilled from passing cars, and neon signs blinked in rhythm with life itself. But amid all that energy, Thomas's heart beat faster than anything around him. He stood outside Le Maison, the grand restaurant whose name he'd only ever seen in glossy magazines. Its tall glass doors gleamed like mirrors, and chandeliers sparkled through the windows, casting golden light onto the street. He took a deep breath, glanced down at his reflection, and brushed a wrinkle from his cleanest shirt. His shoes were old, but polished until they shone. He carried a single rose, simple, red, and real, clutched nervously in his trembling hand. Inside, waiters moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays of wine glasses and silver dishes. Every corner of the restaurant whispered wealth, from the crystal cutlery to the faint scent of expensive perfume. Thomas stepped in slowly, almost afraid that someone would stop him and say, "Sir, this place isn't for you." But no one did. The hostess greeted him politely, though with a flicker of confusion when he mentioned the name Evelyn. Still, she guided him to a small table near the window. Thomas sat down, placed the rose carefully on the table, and checked his watch again. 7 p.m. sharp. That's what the message had said. His palms were sweating. He kept straightening his tie, the same one he had worn at his daughter's high school graduation. It was his good luck tie. He smiled faintly at the memory, then looked around nervously, his heart pounding with hope and disbelief. At another table, half hidden behind a pillar, Jake and his friends had already arrived. Their laughter was barely contained. Jake had his phone ready, its camera pointing straight at Thomas. "This is going to be legendary," he whispered, chuckling under his breath. The others leaned in, pretending to sip their drinks, whispering cruel jokes about what was about to happen. Then, at precisely 7 o'clock, the restaurant doors opened again, and silence fell. Carter stepped in. The CEO of Apex Innovations. The woman whose face appeared on magazine covers, whose speeches were quoted across the business world, and whose presence commanded every room she entered. Her black dress shimmered under the chandelier light, elegant but understated. She carried herself with calm confidence, the kind that came from knowing exactly who she was. Conversations across the restaurant faded into quiet murmurs. Heads turned. Even the waiters slowed their steps. Evelyn Carter had that effect, power wrapped in grace. And then her eyes landed on him. Thomas, sitting nervously by the window, clutching a rose that suddenly felt like a mistake. Their eyes met for a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly. Confusion flickered in hers. She recognized him instantly. He was the janitor, the quiet man who always greeted her with a smile whenever she passed through the lobby. She frowned slightly and walked toward him, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The entire room watched. The pranksters could barely contain their laughter, phones now recording. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice warm but puzzled. "What are you doing here?" Thomas stood up quickly, almost knocking over his chair. His throat went dry. "A good evening, ma'am. I was told to meet someone here. A blind date, actually." He forced a small laugh, hoping she'd understand, hoping he wasn't making a fool of himself. Evelyn blinked. "A blind date?" she repeated. "Yes, ma'am. I was chatting with someone online. She said to meet her here." The CEO glanced around slowly, her sharp eyes scanning the room, and then she saw them. Jake and the others, barely hiding behind their wine glasses, grinning like children who thought they'd done something clever. In an instant, she understood everything. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't lose her composure. Instead, she turned back to Thomas and gave a soft smile that completely disarmed him. Well, she said, lowering herself gracefully into the chair opposite him. Then I suppose I'm your date tonight. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Forks paused midair. The waiters exchanged stunned glances. Even Jake's grin vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Thomas blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. Ma'am, I don't think... But Evelyn interrupted gently. Please sit. If someone invited you here, then you deserve dinner just as much as anyone else. He hesitated, then slowly sat back down. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the menu, trying not to notice the stares from nearby tables. Evelyn, calm and unbothered, smiled at the waiter and said, 2 of the house specials, please. And bring us your finest tea. The waiter nodded quickly, clearly nervous in front of his powerful boss. Thomas glanced toward the group of pranksters. They were frozen, their laughter gone. Evelyn followed his gaze briefly, then looked back at him. Ignore them, she said softly. Let's just enjoy dinner. He nodded quietly, still unsure what to do. For the first time that night, Thomas truly looked at her. Not as the CEO, not as the woman everyone admired, but as a person who had just shown him kindness when she didn't have to. And in that moment, Evelyn saw something in his eyes too. Humility, sincerity, and quiet strength. As the city lights shimmered through the window behind them, 2 people from completely different worlds sat across from each other. One of them tricked, the other determined to turn a cruel joke into a lesson neither the pranksters nor the restaurant would ever forget. At first, Thomas's hands shook so much that he nearly spilled his water. The restaurant still felt too grand, too perfect for someone like him. He couldn't shake the thought that everyone was watching, that at any moment, someone would tell him to leave. But Evelyn's calm, steady tone had a way of silencing the noise around him. She didn't look at him with pity or discomfort. She looked at him as if he truly mattered. Thomas, she said, smiling softly, you don't need to be nervous. It's just dinner. Tell me about yourself. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the table where Jake and his friends sat stiffly, pretending not to stare. Then he looked back at her and took a breath. There's not much to tell, ma'am. I'm just an ordinary man. Evelyn tilted her head. I don't believe that. Everyone has a story. Something in her voice, kind but firm, encouraged him to speak. So he did. He started from the beginning. How he used to work as an engineer in a small manufacturing firm in another city. I loved it, he said, his voice growing steadier. Machines, designs, problem solving, it was what I was good at. I thought I had my life figured out. He paused for a moment, looking down at his hands. Then, one rainy evening, my wife, Anna, was driving home from work. A truck lost control on the highway. She didn't make it. The words came out quietly, almost like he was afraid to disturb her memory. Evelyn's expression softened. I tried to hold it together, Thomas continued, his voice trembling. But grief has a way of changing everything. I couldn't focus at work anymore. Deadlines slipped, and my mind wasn't there. My daughter, Lily, was only 10 then. She needed someone who wouldn't disappear into work or sadness. He swallowed hard before adding, so I left my job, sold our house, moved closer to her school. I took the first job I could find, janitorial work at Apex. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and it gave me time with her. Evelyn didn't interrupt once. Her chin rested lightly on her hand, her eyes reflecting both admiration and sorrow. The candlelight danced between them, illuminating the honesty on his face. So, yes, Thomas said with a faint smile, I became the janitor everyone walks past. But that's okay. My daughter never went to bed hungry. She never missed a birthday or a school play. Last week, she got accepted into college. I may not have riches, but when she hugged me and said, Dad, you made this happen, I realized. He stopped for a moment, his eyes misting. I realized I had everything I needed. Evelyn's throat tightened. Her eyes glistened, and she took a quiet breath before speaking. You gave up your career for your child? Thomas nodded. A father's job isn't just to earn, ma'am. It's to protect, to be present. Money can't raise a child. Love can. There was a pause that seemed to stretch for miles. Around them, forks clinked faintly and soft music played, but neither of them noticed. Evelyn looked at him like she was seeing a reflection of something she'd lost in her own world, humanity. She finally spoke, her voice soft but trembling slightly. Thomas, you said you used to be an engineer. Have you ever thought about going back? He chuckled quietly. Sometimes, but I'm a bit rusty now. Besides, it's too late for that. I'm just grateful I can keep the floors clean and the lights on at home. That's enough for me. Evelyn's lips curved into a thoughtful smile. You know, she said gently, in this world, people chase success like it's the only thing that matters. But tonight, I think I've met someone who's far more successful than most. Thomas blinked, unsure how to respond. Me? He asked, half laughing. Yes, you, she said simply. Because you understand something most people never will. That real success isn't measured in promotions or paychecks, but in the lives we touch and the sacrifices we make. For the first time all night, Thomas didn't feel out of place. The nervousness faded, replaced by something else, a quiet pride. He didn't need to prove himself. He just had to be who he was. Meanwhile, at the corner table, Jake and his friends sat frozen, their smiles gone. The laughter that had seemed so easy hours ago now felt cruel and childish. The man they'd mocked as a joke wasn't pathetic at all. He was a father, a fighter, a man with more courage and strength than any of them had ever shown. Jake lowered his phone, unable to keep filming. Shame burned in his chest as he realized what they had done. His laughter now felt like a slap echoing back at him. Evelyn noticed them watching, but didn't look their way. Instead, she turned back to Thomas and said softly, you know, I think there's something powerful about quiet people. They don't need to announce their worth. They just live it. Thomas smiled, humbled and touched. For the first time in years, someone had truly seen him. And in that quiet corner of La Maison, under the golden light of chandeliers, a cruel prank had turned into something extraordinary. A conversation that would humble an entire room and change the hearts of everyone who heard it. When the meal ended, Evelyn slowly placed her napkin beside her plate, her expression thoughtful but calm. The restaurant's soft music faded into the background as she stood up gracefully. Her chair made a faint sound against the marble floor, and instantly, every eye in La Maison turned toward her. There was something commanding about her presence, not just because she was the CEO of a major company, but because in that moment, she radiated quiet authority mixed with compassion. She looked around, her gaze sweeping over the room until it landed on the corner where Jake and his friend sat frozen. They had stopped pretending to eat. Their laughter was gone, replaced by dread. Evelyn took a steady breath before speaking. Her voice was calm, but it carried easily across the room, clear and unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her tone firm yet graceful. Tonight, I was supposed to meet a man as part of a cruel joke. The words rippled through the restaurant like a sudden gust of wind. People glanced at each other, whispering softly. Evelyn continued, her gaze fixed on the pranksters. Some of my own employees thought it would be entertaining to humiliate someone they believed was beneath them. They expected me to walk in, be confused, and leave a man sitting here in embarrassment. But what they didn't know was that tonight, I would end up meeting one of the most honorable people I've ever known. Her eyes softened as she turned toward Thomas. He sat there stunned, unable to move, the rose he'd brought still lying untouched beside his plate. This man, Evelyn said, gesturing toward him, has more integrity, more courage, and more heart than many who wear suits and ties. He represents everything that is good about humanity, humility, strength, and sacrifice. The restaurant had gone utterly silent. Even the waiters stood still, listening. She paused for a moment before speaking again, her voice thick with emotion. You see, while some chase power and recognition, people like Thomas remind us what real greatness looks like. He doesn't seek attention or praise. He simply does his job with pride and lives with dignity. And that, she said, her eyes meeting the group of pranksters again, is something far too rare in this world. The young employees lowered their heads, unable to meet her gaze. Shame washed over their faces as the reality of their cruelty sank in. Jake, the one who had planned the prank, looked pale and sick. He wished he could disappear. Evelyn's voice softened as she looked back at Thomas. You remind me, she said gently, why humility is not weakness, and why sacrifice is not failure. You are not just our janitor, Thomas. You are a man of dignity, of quiet strength. And from this day forward, I will make sure that no one in my company forgets that." Her words hung in the air like a promise. For a moment, no one moved. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. Then, Evelyn added something that made Thomas's breath catch. "Thomas," she said, stepping closer to his table, "I'd like to offer you something. We have a new maintenance supervisor position opening next week. It comes with better pay, full benefits, and, most importantly, the respect you've long deserved. I can't think of anyone more worthy of it than you." Gasps of surprise filled the room. The same people who had mocked him now watched in awe as the humble janitor they had laughed at was being publicly recognized, not as a joke, but as a symbol of honor. Thomas blinked rapidly, his throat tightening. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His eyes shimmered with tears as he slowly stood, almost shaking. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say," he whispered. Evelyn smiled warmly. "Just say you'll accept it." He nodded, voice trembling. I will. Thank you, ma'am. From the bottom of my heart." And then, unexpectedly, someone began clapping. It started with a single person near the back of the room. Then another joined, and soon the entire restaurant was on its feet, applauding. The sound filled the hall, bouncing off the walls and surrounding Thomas in a wave of emotion. Some people even wiped away tears. The waiters clapped. The pranksters did too, not out of obligation, but out of genuine remorse. Jake stood, his eyes glassy. When Evelyn's gaze met his, he mouthed a quiet, "I'm sorry." She nodded once, accepting it without a word. As the applause continued, Thomas looked around, overwhelmed. He had never been the center of attention before, never received this kind of respect. It felt unreal. For years, he had swept the floors where others walked without noticing him. And now, those same people were standing in his honor. When the noise finally settled, Evelyn turned to the crowd one last time. "Let tonight be a reminder," she said, "that every person deserves respect, no matter their job, their title, or the clothes they wear. Because greatness doesn't come from where you stand in life, but from how you carry yourself when no one's watching." Her words struck deep. As Thomas left the restaurant that night, the world outside seemed brighter, the air lighter. He didn't just walk out with a new job. He walked out with dignity restored and a story that would be remembered in that company forever. And behind him, Evelyn Carter watched with a faint, proud smile. Knowing she hadn't just defended a man, she had reminded an entire room what it truly means to be human. The next Monday morning, the mood inside Apex Innovations was completely different. The same glass walls that once reflected quiet indifference now seemed to glow with a quiet sense of respect. Thomas entered the building carrying his old mop and bucket, just as he always did. But this time, something had changed. Employees who used to walk past him without a glance now smiled and greeted him with warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," said one intern nervously. Another held the elevator door open for him. Even Jake, the mastermind behind the prank, stood waiting near the break room, looking guilty and uncomfortable. "Thomas," Jake began, his voice low, I wanted to say I'm sorry. What we did was awful. We didn't think it through." Thomas looked at him for a moment, then placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Son, everyone makes mistakes," he said kindly. "What matters is that you learn from them. Don't let laughter come at the cost of someone's dignity." Jake nodded, his eyes glassy with emotion. It was a moment that humbled everyone watching. The man they had once laughed at was now teaching them something no textbook or CEO speech ever could: human decency. Later that day, Thomas received a message asking him to come to the top floor, the CEO's office. He had never been there before. As the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a space filled with sunlight and success, the kind of world that once felt far away from his own. Evelyn Carter stood by the window, a soft smile on her face as she turned to greet him. "Thomas," she said, motioning for him to sit, "I wanted to thank you personally. What happened the other night, it reminded me that titles and positions mean nothing without compassion." Thomas shifted awkwardly in his seat. "Ma'am, I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth. Evelyn shook her head. That's what makes it special. You reminded this company what it means to be human. She paused, then handed him a formal letter with the Apex logo at the top. This is your official appointment as maintenance supervisor. Higher pay, benefits, and full medical coverage for your family. Thomas's hands trembled as he held the paper. His voice broke slightly as he whispered, "Thank you, ma'am. I don't know what to say. Just keep being who you are," Evelyn said warmly. "That's all the world really needs." As he left her office, the employees gathered around his desk, clapping and congratulating him. For the first time in years, Thomas felt seen, not as a janitor, but as a man of worth. His eyes welled up, and he quietly said, "Thank you, everyone. Let's keep this place shining, inside and out." Months passed. Thomas's daughter, Emily, visited the office one afternoon. She was a bright young woman, her eyes full of dreams. She carried a small bouquet of flowers and nervously approached Evelyn's office. "Ms. Carter," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. I got my scholarship results today, and I know you helped make it happen." Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening. "Your father earned that, not me. He's one of the finest men I've ever met." Emily turned to her father, who stood quietly by the door. "Dad," she said, hugging him tightly, "you've worked so hard all these years. I'm so proud of you." Thomas wiped his eyes, smiling through the emotion. "It wasn't hard work, sweetheart. It was love." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Thomas walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights. The noise of the city faded into a peaceful hum. He thought about everything that had happened: the prank, the dinner, Evelyn's kindness, his daughter's success, and realized something profound. Maybe kindness, he whispered to himself, is the one thing they can't mock. From that day on, Apex Innovations changed in ways no corporate policy ever could. The employees began treating everyone, from the receptionist to the janitors, with the same respect they gave to executives. Evelyn started a new initiative called Human First, aimed at supporting the lives of lower-level staff and their families. The story of the janitor and the CEO spread quietly through the corporate world, becoming an unspoken legend inside Apex. It wasn't about charity, it was about dignity, empathy, and a reminder that every person has a story worth hearing. And every time Thomas pushed his mop down the shiny marble halls, people no longer saw a janitor. They saw a man who had once been the victim of a cruel prank, but had turned it into a powerful lesson about humanity. In the end, it wasn't the prank that people remembered. It was the night a janitor taught an entire company how to be kind. If this story gave you chills or brought a tear to your eye, smash that like button, red heart, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'm waiting to hear how it made you feel. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories, where every story isn't just told, it's felt deep in your heart.